The U.S. government has now admitted its troops used white phosphorus as an incendiary
as veterans,
weapon against Iraqis.
you are still
during
defending
The world's attention is absolutely
whether it's
fixed on
supporting
the
adequate
background. We
defense
only see a
budgets
slice of the whole
to all the men and women of the United States.
There is growing outrage tonight after a unarmed African-American teenager was shot and killed by police in the St. Louis suburb of Ferguson, Missouri. There are conflicting reports about
Throughout its history, Americans have echoed the mantra that the United States is a beacon of freedom, liberty, justice, and equality. That its actions abroad and at home are motivated by a sense of morality and justice, or simply through the idea that America is the greatest nation to ever exist. However, history tells us quite the opposite. The foundation of America was guided by violence and the desire for economic, political, and cultural hegemony. This is central to the dominant ideology of America, one that seeks to benefit a minority at the expense of the wide majority. Through conquest and genocide, motivated by economic need and white supremacy, America was a nation born in blood and terror. American elites have continued to expand and grow America through expropriation, occupation, invasion, and even through control of the media. The following events are foundational to the growth of the American empire. However, they do not include all the events or all the details that would bring to light the violence of the empire. This series seeks to uncover these truths in brevity, and it is simply not possible to explore every event in its entirety. Thank you for your understanding.
Before the American Empire went global, it was established as a settler colony. The colony's primitive accumulation of capital was headed by the colonial elites in the New World, whether that be through the accumulation of land, resources, or labor. The colonial and eventual American ruling class sought to expropriate and privatize the modes of production, which ensured that all communally owned lands and resources of the Native Americans were forcefully and violently taken. After the settlers began to struggle with developing their newly stolen land, the local elites turned towards African slaves for a cheaper, more plentiful labor source, rather than indentured servants. African slaves were imported, and slavery was quickly institutionalized during this period. This created the power imbalance of settlers and slaves, and with it, racism developed through the combination of power imbalance, contempt, and patronization. For the new American colonies to flourish and grow, they necessarily relied on both the genocide of the natives and the forced subjugation of enslaved Africans.
In the build-up to the American Revolution, colonial elites were able to turn working-class anti-colonial anger that stemmed from rampant inequalities and low quality of life towards the British Crown. This enabled the ruling class to stir a revolt which removed the influence of the English leeches, allowing the American aristocracy to seize state power. The movement against the British was rooted in the historical conditions of the American colonial ruling class not needing the British, while the British needed the colonies, as well as an attempt to deflect anger away from the wealthy American ruling class. The men who wrote the eventual Declaration of Independence were far from the average Joe. They were white land-owning elites who could afford to receive an education. Most of these men were career politicians as well. Thomas Jefferson, a wealthy landowner who owned around 600 slaves throughout his lifetime, wrote this now infamous passage.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
This is one of the founding contradictions of the United States, that a man who declared this statement as an axiomatic truth, yet it did not apply to the human beings that he owned as if they were livestock. The Declaration of Independence also purposely omitted natives, African Americans, and women, further proving the class character and intentions of their revolution. This newly freed democracy begs a crucial question: democracy, liberty, and freedom, but for what class? The white landowning class. One of the main notions of American foreign policy, conceived by Thomas Jefferson, is the Empire of Liberty. Jefferson envisioned this empire extending westwards over the American continent and beyond, which he saw as crucial to the American future. And he was correct, as it was especially crucial for American capitalism to thrive due to its need for more land and more capital. This need relies on the continued genocide and displacement of the Native American and Mexican people, as well as the continued enslavement of the black population. From 1778 to 1871, the U.S. government entered into more than 500 treaties with Native American tribes. These treaties permitted U.S. control over native lands in exchange for cash, goods, and medicine. However, every single one of these treaties had been violated in some way or outright broken by the U.S. government. Most settlers were unfazed by the removal of the Native Americans, and in their supremacist attitude, they felt justified in forcibly taking the natives' land because not only did they feel it was their destiny, they felt as though they were making the land more productive and civilized. As Americans continued to move westward, more and more Native American lands were expropriated. Settlers would purposely hunt bison populations to near extinction in order to force natives out of their land, as the bison were an essential resource to the native populations. The native people suffered dreadful conditions, and their population shrunk as hundreds of thousands perished, all while the American ruling class was able to continue to accumulate capital and open up new markets throughout this genocide. Land was also aggressively taken from Mexico during the annexation of Texas, where America intentionally agitated Texans and encouraged them to support leaving Mexico. This heightened at the Mexican-American War, where American President James Polk looked to invade, overrun, and occupy Mexico in order to gain everything west of Texas and the Pacific coast. As quoted by John Schroeder in Mr. Polk's War, President Polk had incited war by sending American soldiers into what was disputed territory, historically controlled and inhabited by Mexicans. All because American elites believed they deserved Texas and the West. It was their destiny.
The settler colonial mindset of acknowledging the injustice of both the Native American genocide and African slavery alongside an affirmation of its inevitability is key to the narrative of the American empire. That the violence is justified because it afforded settlers a certain freedom. As it's taught in classrooms today, American continental conquest is nothing short of just an inevitable but sad story. American culture mirrors this, from caricatures of natives and sports teams to racist cartoons to aptly named Tomahawk missiles or Apache helicopters. The settler colonial mindset is all-pervasive. The mindset is especially prevalent throughout American imperial conquest that the white man's burden was for white settlers to take it upon themselves to civilize the uncivilized, and it hasn't ceased. Today, Western chauvinism is the dominating narrative of American foreign policy, that the idea that America is the bastion of freedom throughout the world, and it is their duty to spread that freedom. Yet, America since its founding has upheld economic need and class warfare over true human liberation. Time and time again, America has ignored sovereign nations, whether that be on the land or abroad, in over 200 years and counting of American domination throughout the world. Yet we are the so-called leader of the free world. This isn't an empire of liberty, it's an empire of violence. This series will highlight the three parts that sustain this empire. From its imperial conquests, to its carceral systems, to its culture industry. Thank you for watching, and power to the people in our fight against global capitalist oppression.